Hello, friends. It's Mr. Matt here with Sunday School for this, our last in our 3 weeks of looking at the Easter story through the eyes of Jesus's friends and seeing what they might be able to tell us about being a disciple or being a friend of Jesus. So today we're going to talk about Simon Peter or Peter. When Jesus meets him, he gives him a different name, and we've come to know him as Peter. But in some parts of the Bible, you'll see his name is Simon, and other people call him Simon Peter for both names. But for today, we'll just keep it nice and simple, and we'll just call him Peter. Now, Peter was a passionate friend of Jesus and a passionate disciple. He tried so very hard to do all of the things that Jesus wanted him to do. And sometimes he was so enthusiastic about it that he made some mistakes. So, for instance, one time Jesus is talking to the disciples and says that he is going to have to go to Jerusalem and that he is going to die there. And Peter says, well, if that's going to happen, don't go. Stay here where it's safe. And Jesus has to correct him and to say, no, Peter, I have to go. It's what God wants me to do. So other times, though, Peter's trust and his enthusiasm for Jesus allows him to do some pretty interesting things. Like there's the story when Jesus is walking on the water and the disciples see him coming and Peter says, if it's you, Lord, let me come out to you. And Jesus says, all right, come then. And Peter gets out of the boat, and as he's going to Jesus, he's walking on water until, of course, he sees the waves and the wind that's blowing around him, and he gets distracted, and then he starts to sink, and Jesus pulls him up. But none of the other disciples did that. It was just Peter. So Peter and Jesus have this very particular kind of relationship. But in the Easter story, we see something else that happens, and we see some things that make you wonder at first whether that friendship is broken. See, when Jesus was arrested and he was taken from the garden to the temple for his trial, Peter follows along behind, sort of hiding in the shadows because he wants to see what happens, but he's afraid of being caught himself and being arrested himself. And while he's waiting around and trying to find out what's happening with Jesus, there's a person that comes by, and this person says, hey, wait a minute, you were one of those people that followed Jesus, aren't you? And Peter, because he's, scared, he's like, no, that wasn't me. I'm not that person. Well, then later it happens again. And someone says, you were with Jesus. And Peter says, no, I was not with him. And another person says, yes, you were. I saw you with Jesus. You're one of his disciples. And Peter finally says, no, I tell you, I don't know that man. And then a rooster crows off in the distance. And it reminds Peter of something that happened around the Last Supper. And that is, Jesus and Peter were talking, and Peter, was telling Jesus how much he loved him. And Jesus said, Peter, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. And sure enough, when that rooster crows, Peter realizes that it's just what Jesus said would happen, that he denied knowing Jesus. He denied his friend and his teacher, and he felt terrible. But we don't know what happened next to Peter because the story is focused on Jesus and on Jesus's death on the cross and being buried. And then the next time we hear about Peter, he's with the other disciples when Jesus is resurrected. But this question of what about Peter saying he didn't know Jesus? Well, later on, we get a story where Jesus has appeared to some of the disciples, and they're out by the water, and they bring in fish, and they sit and they eat fish. And while they're there, Jesus and Peter have a conversation. And Jesus asks Peter, "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter says, "Yes, Lord, I love you." And Jesus says, "Well, then feed my sheep." And then he asks Peter again, "Do you love me?" And Peter says, "Yes, Lord, I love you." And Jesus asks him a third time, "Do you love me?" And each time Peter says, "Yes, Lord, I love you. You should know that." And Jesus says, "Then feed my sheep." And in this moment, we see something very interesting about being a friend of Jesus. And it's something that you probably already know about. And that is that Jesus has already forgiven Peter for saying that he didn't know him. Jesus has already moved past that. He's already forgiven him. But he has this conversation, and he asks Peter 3 times if he loves him, because Peter is carrying a lot of guilt about what he said. And Jesus forgives him and says, "Do you love me?" And gives Peter the chance to apologize and to say, "Yes, Lord, I love you. I'm sorry, please." The interesting thing, though, is Jesus has already forgiven him. Jesus has already moved past it. Jesus is already saying, "Okay, Peter, since you love me, I have a job for you. I need you to go take care of my sheep since I'm not going to be here." He is already trusting the start of the church and spreading the word to Peter. He's already forgiven Peter. Now, I think this story, and sort of looking at this through Peter's eyes, or focused on Peter, gives us a neat perspective and something to remember about being a disciple and about being a friend. See, there are going to be times where we say or do things that are going to hurt our friends. It's inevitable. It might be accidental. We may not mean to what we say. The person may hear what we've said in the wrong way and they get upset, but it's going to happen. And it's going to happen, and we're going to do it to our friend Jesus too. We're going to do something that's going to hurt Jesus's feelings. That's going to be something that he's not fond of. But we also know that part of being a friend with Jesus is that Jesus is ready to forgive us. Jesus is ready to forgive us when we make those mistakes. He's ready to continue to do the work that he's asked us to do. He's already trusting us to come to him and to say, "I'm sorry. Yes, Lord, I love you." And then to get on with the work of taking care of the sheep. A friendship with Jesus is one that lets go of the things that get in the way. It's built on forgiveness. It's built on trusting that the other person is trying to do the best that they can and loving them. And so this is a good lesson for us when it comes to our friendship with Jesus, but it can also be a really important lesson for us when it comes to our friendship with other people. Sometimes we need to remember to be more like a Jesus friend and to think that the other person is doing the best that they can, and they need to have a little grace and forgiveness. And we can give that to them, just like Jesus gives it to us. So, that's our lesson for today about seeing the Easter story a little differently, and about what Jesus' friends can tell us about being a friend to Jesus and a friend to one another. Now, the activity video that we have will be a sort of a creative thing that takes this idea of looking at our friends and looking at Jesus and what friendship can mean So I hope you'll tune into it and check it out. All right, that's it for now. Bye.